What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the quest to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Elke Wiss, and we talk about the power of questions and the discomfort and maybe insecurity that goes around the question. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, visit workshops.work to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy the show. Hello,
Yes.
Elke.
Hi.
I'm looking forward to talk to you today about questions.
Yes, me too.
Wonderful. And before we dive into it, I am very curious because you are a book writer. You wrote
Yes,
Socrates in Sneakers in Dutch.
I
Soon
did.
coming out in English.
I hope so. Yes.
Yeah, this would be wonderful.
We're looking for a publisher. So if anyone listening is or knows a publisher, then feel free to email me.
Wonderful. I will put your details in the show notes.
Great.
Are you actually calling yourself a facilitator?
Yes, I do. Because what I facilitate is pretty much good conversations and developing an attitude of questioning. And I think those facilitators are necessary because we don't easily come there by ourselves.
Yeah, a good question is worth more than a good answer. Right?
Yes, definitely.
Because it empowers. What got you into this fascination of asking questions? What's your story behind?
Well, the story behind it is that I actually have a background in theater. So I am a theater director, and I write theater plays, and I train people in presentation techniques, and I help develop their own creative stage performance. And in doing so, I recognize that, well, when I make something, I want to write a play or I want to perform with a group of actors, I would like to have some tools to structure my own thinking, but also I want to have some tools to ask questions to my actors that helps the conversation going, and to really, for example, come to the essence of the subject that the play is about. So at first it was just my own fascination, my own quest for some tools. And then when I got them, I started seeing how much we mess up all the time in asking questions and having good philosophical conversations. And then, I don't know, I kind of have this tendency where when I get very enthusiastic about something, I think the whole world should know this. So then I go around and I preach, sometimes to the annoyance of others. But I really recognize this as something that could be so valuable in our everyday conversations, especially in these tough times where we want to have the tough conversations, but we don't know how. So I decided to facilitate workshops, trainings, individual coaching sessions. And then in the end, I thought, well, this is great, but it always limits itself to one individual or a group of people. So I asked myself, how can I help as much people as possible in developing this, art of questioning or Socratic dialogue skills? And then I thought, well, I think a book would be the answer. So that's how it all started, actually.
And it's somehow, I was surprised when you mentioned that you got into the art of asking questions by training theater players or actors, because I would think in all my ignorance that it's about learning by heart a role and the text and not by questioning the entire purpose or essence.
Yes, I can imagine your surprise. And at the same time, for me, it is so obvious that creativity or art and practical philosophy, it goes hand in hand. Because if we don't work with the text, for example, I want to make a theater play about the concept of identity, or the concept of family, or the concept of justice or courage, well, whatever you want to make a theater play about, then it is essential that I can structure my own thinking about this concept, but also essential that I know how to ask questions to my actors to really develop a similar language, or try to get to the essence of what it means to be in a family, or what it means to be courageous.
So that they can also then really embrace their role and deeply understand what they want to act out.
Exactly. That, and as well, I think what an artist does, I mean, an artist does all sorts of things, but we, as creative artists, we ask questions all the time about how this world functions, or how we see how it could function differently.
Mm-hmm.
So the art of asking ourselves the right questions and develop our own thinking, I think, is essential, because a creative mind can go anywhere. So structuring this creative mind and really, develop a discipline in thinking and questioning, I think it really benefits the creative process. Yeah.
And I like that you just mentioned that it's also the art of asking yourself questions. So do you have some sort of a routine or a set of questions that you would ask yourself when you're in this creative process of developing a new idea, a new play, a new workshop?
I'm not sure. Maybe I do, but maybe it's unconsciously. So let me think a minute about what it is exactly that I'm doing then. I think what I like to do is something we call a self-consultation. Mm-hmm. And then if anyone wants to try it, I would say, write it down. Mm-hmm. So what I would first do is start with a question. Mm-hmm. For example, maybe you notice a tendency in yourself that you are hiding. Mm-hmm. I think everybody knows this. You don't pick up the phone. You want to write posts on social media, but you're kind of scared for the reactions. Mm-hmm. Or, well, we all have this tendency to hide from time to time.
Procrastination.
Exactly, or procrastination. So mm-hmm. Procrastination could be a good example. So suppose that I notice this tendency in myself, then I like to ask myself a question that starts with why. Mm-hmm. So in this case, why do I procrastinate? Mm-hmm. I write this question down, and then I just advise people to sit with it and not jump to every answer that immediately pops up, mm-hmm. but sit with the question. And then an answer arises, whether you want it or not, but there is something that provides a clue as to why you are procrastinating. So, for example, I might think, well, if I'm being very honest, practical philosophy is about, radical, brutal honesty as well. Then I procrastinate because I am scared. Mm. So you write that down, and then you ask yourself another question. What are you scared of? Would be the logical question to ask then. And then you just name all the things that you're scared of. Well, I'm scared that I will fail. I am scared that people react in a way that I don't like. I'm scared people will get angry. And then you have maybe 3 or 4 ideas that you can question. Why would it be a problem if people got angry? Why are you scared of the judgment of others? What will happen? And then in doing this exercise, you really go to the core, because of course it's not about procrastination. Usually, procrastination is just a symptom. Yeah. So often we ask questions about the symptoms. And as a thinking doctor, I help people to get to the root of this symptom.
Thinking doctor. Awesome. Do you have a favorite?
Does that make sense? Like this exercise and how you can question yourself?
Totally. Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that you sit with a question, because I also like to process these kind of questions, but then I would go in the other extreme. I would brainstorm answers. So this doesn't mean jumping into action either, but just, okay, what comes up in a short amount of time? And then I just write down without overthinking, and then sit with the answers. Oh, what did my unconscious mind produce here?
Yes, but I think that can provide some insights as well. And at the same time, I think we are used to that type of thinking, which is actually it takes less discipline because it just flows and you put it down. The danger of it is that it can be more superficial.
Yeah.
But in doing so, of course, you can do a brainstorm, but then I would invite you to take one idea out of your brainstorm and dive into it and sit with it and investigate it and look at it and, like a Rubik's Cube. Approach it from all directions. But oftentimes, because it can be painful and difficult, and we don't want to recognize that we're scared of the judgment of others, and therefore we procrastinate because it's uncomfortable. So the tendency is rather to move away from the difficult questions than move toward them.
Yeah.
And then doing a brainstorm might feel like you're doing something, but sometimes when you look at it closely, you're actually avoiding.
Yes,
so
it depends on what you do.
Exactly.
What you do with the answers of the brainstorm then, yeah.
Yes,
So
exactly.
Yeah, it's true. It's about the being instead of the doing. I had an episode on that. We tend to jump into doing when we feel scared.
Exactly.
Give ourselves the impression that we are doing something and we're active. And
and it feels good. So then you could say, well, I did some reflection today.
Instant gratification.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what makes a good question?
A good question, I think the number one ingredient of a good question is curiosity. And curiosity implies a couple of things. Because oftentimes we say we're curious, but we're actually not. Curiosity implies that, number one, there is something you do not know. You do not know why you procrastinate. Number two, you recognize that you don't know something. And number three, you want to know. But all these three ingredients, we tend to mess them up. We pretend we know things we don't actually know. And we are basically not that interested in what we don't know. So curiosity is really the number one ingredient in asking a good question. It should be the birthplace of your question. If curiosity is not there, then your question is probably just your opinion or a hypothesis or a comment or an accusation with the question mark at the end. And that is not a question.
Yeah. And it feels to me as if curiosity is then something that you cannot force. So if I'm not really interested, or if I don't want to admit that I actually don't know and I want to learn, then I don't ask a question. Or can I learn to be curious?
I think we can distinguish the two here, because what I write in my book is that my first tip is to ask yourself, should I ask something or should I say something? And oftentimes we do both. And I'm human. So when my boyfriend comes home and I'm tired, I don't have a good day, then I hear myself asking, why have you not cleaned the dishes yet? I mean, in the form, there's a question mark at the end, but of course we all know this is not a question. This is something else. So then I have to be very clear and honest with myself that I should not ask a question here. I should just say what I want to say. I say, hey, I see you have not cleaned the dishes and you promised that you would. And it annoys me. And in that way, we are much more clear. So if you feel like you are not curious, then don't bullshit yourself and the other by asking some phony questions. And then try to train yourself to step aside or let your opinion or your idea, just let it go and try to be curious. Try to ask yourself, what do I not know yet about this story, about this idea, about the other? And what would I like to know? And then you will ask a question.
And maybe also thinking back of your previous exercise of self-questioning, why am I not in the position to just state, hey dear, I would have loved that you washed the dishes, but you didn't. And this upsets me. So what is it in yourself that gets you to ask a question? So what are you actually afraid of when you state as it is and how you feel?
Please.
So I have the impression that from what you say, questions often hide something else.
Yes. It's nice that you say this, because in my workshops, I train people to analyze the question and to really look at it for what it is, not for what the other intends it to be, but for what he literally says. So in the example of why have you not cleaned the dishes, you can dissect the whole question in form and content, and then develop some ideas about why would someone do this? Indeed, what is he or she afraid of? Is this not a question? Or is it? And why is it not a question? And if it's not a question, then what is it actually?
Yeah. And funny enough, I can imagine that depending on your tone, so if you came home in a good mood and you see that the dishes are not done and you ask, hey, honey, why didn't you make the dishes? Then it becomes totally different, because then maybe you're curious what came into his way. Maybe he had a bad day. Maybe he got busy. Maybe he got a call from a client that prevented him of doing that task.
Yes. And then still, even with a nice tone, one can ask, you can ask yourself, why not just state it and then ask a question? Why not just state, hey, I see the dishes aren't done. I was just curious to know, how did that happen? Because in asking, why have you not done the dishes, even though your intentions may be good and there's curiosity there, we have kind of learned to abuse the why question as a weapon to attack the other. So even if you don't mean it like that, the other will hear, you stupid fool, you should have done the dishes. Why didn't you?
Yeah. I was about to say that. So what is it about the why question that makes it so sharp? And maybe it's because it's pointing directly at something that is identical. So why goes directly to the core of our identity. So it hurts.
Yes. Yes, I explained this in my book, why I have so much trouble asking good questions. And I think the why question, there are a few problems with it. One, we have abused it too many times. We have used it as a weapon. And second, when one receives this question, we immediately respond in a defense mode, because we are used to this question not being a question, but to being an attack. And third, the why question kind of invites you to explain yourself, to explain something that may be so obvious for you that you don't want to explain, because then it might turn out that it is not that obvious for the other, or that your argument is weak, or that it was merely a feeling. So we kind of get uncomfortable with the why question, because it does touch our identity. And it might mean that we have to admit that we're not as sure as we initially thought or pretended to be.
So it seems as if why questions are very effective when we're questioning ourselves, but very ineffective when we invite others to reflect.
Yeah, I think it is the most effective question there is. And I think I would like to create a culture where the why question can be a question again, because it's the most important question these days. But we have to have the courage and the discipline to deal with this question and not try to avoid it, try to bullshit ourselves and other people, but explain ourselves much more than we do now. These days, there's a tendency to, drop a statement or an argument. For example, parents should vaccinate their children. There is a statement there. You could question it. And the most obvious question is, well, why? Why do you think parents should vaccinate their children? But then we get uncomfortable and we get upset and we get angry and we say, well, that's obvious. They just should. That's just how it is. Or that's just what I'm feeling. So we have lost the ability to use arguments, to use reason, because we are so attached to our identity, and changing your opinion is in fact not done. And I would propose that the world would be a better place if we kind of let go of this fake identity and let ourselves be questioned.
In order to do that, though, we need to feel safe. Because
why?
When someone attacks my identity, then it makes me vulnerable. So if someone asks me a why question that goes deep, then for me to reveal my identity, I must feel safe enough not to be hurt and not to have this take put against me. And I think that's just a very instinctive thing to do. We don't expose our inner feelings to anyone who comes along. So how do you create the space in which you can ask why questions?
Well, first of all, I would like to challenge the presupposition about safety.
Mm-hmm.
I would propose the idea that a conversation can be uncomfortable and can be not safe. One of my heroines, Brené Brown, she talks a lot about vulnerability and courage. I think you know her. She also proposes this idea of vulnerability. It's inevitable that there will be unsafety there, or that you will be uncomfortable.
And I think there's a big difference between unsafety and uncomfort. So I think that it's good to be uncomfortable at times, because this is where we grow, this is where we question ourselves, this is where we get breakthroughs and have these real important conversations. But being unsafe is something substantial. It's when we don't feel safe, we cannot think. We go into our instinctive brains where we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. When we are afraid of either an emotional or physical threat, all of our brain shuts down to, okay, what can I do in order to survive? And not, oh, what kind of possibilities can I explore?
Mm-hmm.
So I would challenge you on the distinction between safety and comfort.
Yes. So yeah, I get this distinction. So I think in answering your question, like what can you do to create this safe environment? I think that first of all, the responsibility to feel safe is also your own.
Mm.
It is also your own when you are being questioned, to take care of your own safety.
Mm-hmm.
And to trust that, well, okay, we might have an argument, we might not agree, the other might judge me. So what?
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a tendency to slide from unsafety to wanting to be comfortable, so we avoid. So I would propose an idea of be responsible for your own safety and don't demand this from the other. And at the same time, as a questioner, of course, I have the responsibility to make sure that I have an attitude of curiosity. I have an attitude of, well, some people would say postponing judgment.
Mm-hmm.
In practical philosophy, we say you have to judge, and you have to let yourself be judged, and then reconcile yourself with this idea. We judge all the time. So name things as they are. One of my favorite teachers has this saying. He says, "You have to call a cat a cat. It is not a dog with a mustache." But oftentimes we are used to calling a cat not a cat, but a dog with a mustache, because we are scared of the labels. Yeah. When in fact a label can help you make things clear and see things for what they are. So safety then becomes a responsibility of both. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can just play with the idea that as long as you're sitting in a chair and you're breathing and you're having a conversation in which you think, what does safety have to do with anything?
I think for me, safety is at the core of everything, just because it unleashes our potential and allows these creative thoughts and this curiosity to emerge. Mm-hmm. If I'm afraid, I'm not curious. I cannot be afraid and curious at the same time.
Yes, I agree. So then when you feel afraid, how cool would it be to be curious as to why you are feeling afraid?
Absolutely. And this is where the self-awareness kicks in, where you can snap yourself out. And from what you said, I also hear that I like the concept of the shared responsibility for safety, because of course it's my decision also how much I reveal when I'm questioned. On the other hand, if I'm the person who asked the question and I am curious to hear the genuine answer, then it's also my responsibility to create the environment in which I can expect this answer to emerge. So it's in my own best interest to create this safe environment so that the other person can expose vulnerability. When did we stop asking good questions? Because when we're kids ask the why questions all the time and they're not afraid. And then at one point we are then abusing the why question, as you beautifully said, and use it as a weapon suddenly. What do you think brings this shift in attitude and behavior?
I think children, of course, have a sense of wonder, but also they are unaware of themselves, like the way we are, we adults. In some way, they are a bit naive, and naivety brings forth the most beautiful questions.
Mm-hmm.
And we lose this naivety, of course, because, there are bills to pay and mortgages and, and stuff like that. And then I think when we grow up, I have this beautiful example of my sister. She was walking on the street once, I think with my mother or something, and she asked the question, "Mom, why is this lady so fat?"
Mm.
And, well, as adults tend to do, we say things like, "Oh, you can never ask that." That's an inappropriate question.
Mm-hmm.
I also heard the example once of where a child saw a person with one leg and was very curious, like, "Wow, I've never seen a person with one leg. Why would this person have one leg? Mommy, what would have happened to this guy? Can I ask him?" And of course, the mommy in this case said, no, you cannot ask those questions. When in fact, oftentimes the people that have the one leg in this example would say, "Yes, please ask me the question."
Instead of just staring.
Instead of staring, or instead of, we can read questions on people's faces. They are like a big neon sign flickering in the dark. But we created this culture where we label one question as bad or inappropriate or too much or too big or too close or too evasive or whatever. And then, of course, when you grow up, you start thinking, I don't want to upset anyone. I am curious, but I don't want to bother her. Maybe I might touch something that's a bit awkward or a bit sensitive. So let's just not ask. And what remains when you don't ask is just assumptions.
And it's actually a missed opportunity. And it's maybe even, to put it in a very provocative way, a lack of respect and recognition for the person to be responsible of the answer they give. So if we don't ask a question, then who are we to know how this person reacts?
It is so arrogant to decide for the other, "Oh, this might be too painful for her. I better not ask." I had to learn this lesson myself. I once was working as a horse training teacher, so I would teach people how to ride their horses better. And one of my favorite students, I hadn't heard from her in a couple of months, and then she told me, "Well, I didn't get in touch with you because my father had died." She wrote to me in an email. And then we started lessons again, and I saw her, and I decided, I think I want to ask about her father, but maybe she'll cry or she'll get emotional. I don't dare ask. So I didn't ask. We just had our lesson, and then we each went our separate ways. And then later on, she confessed to me that she was actually quite upset because we had a good connection, and I did not ask about this great event that had happened to her. And then I thought, wow, what an arrogance of me to wanting to avoid a possible, uncomfortable situation, because this was about me. I didn't want to see her cry. I didn't want to feel the uncomfortable situation of, seeing her grief or something. So it was very selfish not to ask.
Yeah, it's interesting that the why question is a very sharp weapon, but the question that is not asked is kind of an invisible weapon that might be even more deadly.
Yeah, exactly. Nicely put.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. More than 30,000 facilitators, trainers, and coaches use our workshop planner tool and save time and effort in the design process. So, how do they do it? Our drag and drop agenda builder makes it easy to transform your ideas into high-quality workshops, and the timing of your agenda automatically updates when you make changes. You can collaborate in real time with your colleagues and easily share professional-looking printouts with your clients. And if you need inspiration, you can check out our library of more than 500 activities and exercises and simply drag the ones you need right into your workshop agenda. So check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process. And now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
What makes a workshop fail?
Nice one. I think I have seen some workshops where the teacher or the facilitator is not really giving a workshop. I mean, in the word workshop, there is the word work. So ideally, there would be some work done by the participants. But I have seen these workshops where the facilitator merely just sends out information, has a PowerPoint presentation and just blabbers out some theory and then hands out a paper, then asks, well, are there any questions? And then we call that a workshop. And I think that's what makes a workshop fail.
And the question, are there any questions, is maybe not a question. It might not invite genuine.
It's not a very, invitational thing to do, but, well, it happens. So I think that's what makes workshops fail. Yeah.
Ignorance about the participants. So how can we invite groups to ask questions?
I think there are some exercises that you can do. You can ask reflective questions. What I'd like to do, for example, is to start with a yes or no question, or share like a case where people have to answer a question like, do you think this is If you think yes, raise your hand. If you think no, raise your hand. And then you can either go for a discussion or you can ask more questions, like, why do you think this is yes or no?
Would this be an opener for your workshops to just get a sense of the situation? Or in which context would you use this exercise?
Yes, I think it's a very good opener to trigger people to be immediately active and to immediately think. So I would choose a case that they can recognize from their own life. So an exercise that I'd like to start with is just this little situation that maybe we talked about before. You come home, you see something is not done, and you know your partner promised that it would be done, and then propose like 3 or 4 things to say. And then discuss with the participants, well, what do you think is best? Which answer do you think is best? And why would that answer be the best thing to do or say?
What is your favorite question?
My favorite question is, could this be untrue? So suppose you think or say something that you are absolutely convinced of. I would invite you to ask yourself, could this be untrue? And then just play with the idea that the answer to that question is yes. And there the thinking will start immediately. Why could this be untrue? What are the best arguments against my own idea? Maybe you'll change your mind. That never hurt anyone. No one died from changing their mind. Or maybe you will investigate and you will look at it and you will challenge your idea and you will come back to this initial idea, but with much more strength. Your idea will be much more thought through.
Which makes sense because we are convincing ourselves instead of being convinced and confronted by the arguments of others.
Yes.
Yeah. What if this was untrue? Good one. I like it. And I just realized that I haven't asked you the hashtag question.
Well, it's never too late.
No. So what would be your hashtag if you were one?
Yes, I've thought about this. I like this question. My hashtag would be hashtag cappuccino or latte.
I think you have to explain that.
Well, first of all, on the content of the hashtag, I always, when ordering coffee, I still don't know which of the two I prefer, a cappuccino or a latte. And it defines basically who I am, because I can doubt about anything. This dress or that dress, these shoes or that shoes, cappuccino or latte. When ordering in a restaurant, I always look at what the other is ordering, and then I try to make a deal so I don't have to choose. So that's why this hashtag.
To what extent is the struggle to choose related to the Socratic questioning that seem to be part of your identity?
It's basically who I am, to question everything. And then, of course, reconciling with the idea that there is no absolute. That I find it very interesting and worthwhile to question the ideas that I have. And in doing so, things get clearer. And also things get clearer as to who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? So you develop a sort of attitude that in questioning and in allowing yourself to think the unthinkable, there lies true freedom. So for me, not being able to choose doesn't really feel like a struggle anymore, because by now I know, well, there's no absolute. I'm allowed to change my mind. So in fact, I am totally free.
And I think for when it comes to a cappuccino versus a latte, it doesn't really matter. When something has to get done, or even when we think of a group that needs to take a decision, to what extent can the process of questioning and always sitting with questions actually avoid a group to get things done? So how can you end the process of questioning?
Well, this presupposes that when you question things, you don't do stuff. And I would say precisely when you question everything, there's also a wide variety of opportunities. Of course, you would have to take them, and you would have to take a step and stay stay moving. So I think what you're getting at is the danger that we become sort of lethargic or in apathy, just sitting on the couch, asking ourselves questions. But a question is merely a starting point to get the thinking going on. And in doing so, it will automatically be clearer what you could do and what you should do at this point. And then I hope that we start questioning this again so that we can adjust. But when I do, for example, workshops or trainings in companies, I see the tendency to ask a question, taking the first answer that suits us and never question it again. Only then to find out 6 months later, I think we found the wrong answer, or maybe even asked the wrong question 6 months ago.
What is more dangerous, asking the wrong question or taking the first answer?
Wow, nice one. Taking the first answer. Because oftentimes we ask questions because we don't know something. So we ask a question about something that is immediately visible to us or immediately there. But more often than not, this turns out not to be the true question. The question, why do I procrastinate? Like we spoke about, it's a question about a symptom. But the true question might be, why do I fear the judgment of others? So starting with the wrong question, that actually happens a lot on one-on-one coach consultations. Mostly people start with the wrong question, but the question that is not actually their question. But clinging to the first answer that comes to mind, I think it's much more dangerous, because when you cling to something with both hands and eyes, you fail to see what else is there. So there will be a lack of creativity. There will be a lack of options. There will be a lack of thorough thinking, of discipline. So I think we as facilitators know this. When we do a brainstorm, the first ideas are always the obvious ones. After 10 minutes or 15 minutes, the interesting ideas will come along, because then, the first few just have popped up, the obvious ones, and then after, looking past this mountain of obviousness, there lies the true gold.
Yeah, it makes sense, because if we assume that we're asking the one question, but we don't stop with the first answer, then we allow just more questions to come, whereas the answer stops the process.
Yes, yes, that's nice. Answers stop the thinking, and questions develop the thinking.
Yeah. And I asked you before the question, what makes a good question? What would actually be also interesting is what makes a bad question?
What makes a bad question is when it's in fact not a question at all.
Yeah, what you said, yeah. If it's
Yeah, and we base these questions on assumptions. So there's, of course, this saying, assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups, and assumption is also the mother of all fucked up questions, I think. Yeah. Am I allowed to say fuck? Well, I just did.
No censorship here.
Good. I like that. So what makes for a bad question is when it's actually a suggestion, or I'm actually just sharing my opinion, or it's an accusation. Those are very bad questions, and they come from bad listening. 99% of asking the right questions is very good, sharp listening. So if someone tells me a story and I want to ask questions, I have to listen very carefully to what the other is saying and stay curious about what I don't know. But mostly we listen with an attitude of, hey, what do I think of this? Do I recognize this? Hey, I also have such a mother-in-law who's always whining. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So we are very egocentric listeners, and that makes very egocentric bad questions.
Yeah, usually the default is always to listen to reply instead of listen to understand.
Yes.
And I think it might be related to our school system and how we are educated, socialized. But maybe this would be a topic for a different episode.
Well, you're right. It has to do with our school system. In the book, Socrates and Sneakers, I have 6 reasons as to why we suck at asking questions. And one of them is actually very interesting. Research revealed that when we speak about ourselves, they called it self-disclosure, our bodies create dopamine. So to speak about yourself just feels very good. So it's very rewarding to listen and to speak about, oh, I had this also. I also have a boss who is always controlling me. Oh, I also have this mother-in-law, or try to give advice to the other, or try to help them. So how our body functions, it's very logical that we tend to listen and speak from ourselves. And the art of asking questions is actually the opposite. You have to forget yourself and dive into the experience and the words of the other.
So it's another reason that we suck in asking questions.
Another reason is what you just mentioned, that it's in our school system, we don't get trained to ask questions and develop curiosity. We get trained to form opinions and we repeat the knowledge we already have. And another reason we have spoke about a little bit is the fear of asking questions due to the idea of, well, if I ask a question, people will think I'm stupid or I have to know it all. Another reason is that we reward having an opinion and stating that opinion loud and clearly. We reward this better than asking questions.
It's actually interesting because I became better in asking curious questions after I finished my PhD. And I think it was just the key reason was that I suddenly had permission to ask stupid, air quotes, stupid questions, because people would assume that I kind of have the basic of intelligence and then I'm not judged by my questions. Whereas very often when someone asks a question, it's so easy, oh, that's a stupid question.
Yeah, so this example is it's very nice, and it shows, I think, part of our culture. I first have to prove I'm intelligent, to myself mostly, and then I can ask the stupid questions.
Yeah.
Which is, to me, so strange. So strange.
And it is sad because it closes the door for all these meaningful conversations, for uncomfortable conversations that might bring us forward. Because usually they're the stupid questions, those who point at the apparently obvious that actually reveal what is not so obvious.
Yes, exactly. That's very well described. This phenomenon of, well, I don't dare ask the obvious, when in fact those are the most important questions we have to ask. So I feel so sorry for all the people in all the boardrooms that stopped questioning themselves and others.
Yeah.
Because, you said it very well. Questions is what help us move forward. But then we have to allow ourselves to ask the questions and also to be questioned.
Yeah. Is it therefore that your Socrates wears sneakers to move forward? Oh.
Nice one. Well, yeah, let's take this idea. He moves forward very rapidly. I hope so. The book does anyway, considering the numbers of people who bought it. So it shows that there's a need for this kind of thinking and developing this attitude. And yes, another reason why the book is called Socrates in Sneakers is that this guy, this ancient philosopher Socrates, he has a way of having conversations that I think we can learn from. So it's this old ancient knowledge in a new, fresh way.
Nice. I like that. Is there anything that you have in mind that you would like to share with the audience that we haven't covered yet?
Well, I think we have covered quite a bit. We went very in depth on the safety issue. Yeah, I think I would just like to invite everyone listening to see thinking as a playground. Sometimes I think we are afraid to think the unthinkable, and we place a censorship on our own questions, on our own ideas. And I always invite people to see it as, well, what can happen? In your thinking, you're not a surgeon. No one is going to die if you think stuff. So, especially when you feel uncomfortable in thinking in one direction, go there. The worst that can happen is that you will discover something you did not know. Well, I think that's part of being human. So,
be a good thing.
Yes. And you might also discover something about yourself or your thinking or your judgment that you might not even like, that you judge yourself for. And I would invite you to not move away from that, but to see it for what it is and to reconcile with who you are. Maybe you find out that you are lazy or that you're sometimes arrogant. Sometimes you think you're better than others. We tend to overwrite those thoughts with different thoughts. Like, or we tend to console ourselves. Oh no, that's not a bad thing. But, well, it's part of being human.
Yeah.
So I think a job that we have to do is, one, know yourself, and not only the pleasant sides of yourself, but also the not so pleasant side of yourself. And two, reconcile with who you are and try to change what you want to change as far as possible. Yeah, so I think that would be the thought I would like to express in this podcast as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having taken the time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.